Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Sport England's Active Design webinar. I'm Fiona Howie, I'm the Chief Executive of the Town and Country Planning Association, and I'll be chairing today's event. We're absolutely delighted so many of you could join us. In case you haven't come across the TCPA before, we're a charity that's committed to challenging, inspiring and supporting people to create healthy, sustainable and resilient places that are fair for everyone. We very much share the view of Sport England that how we create neighbourhoods and manage development is important for people's mental and physical health and well-being. So we're really delighted to be able to work with them to support the creation of active environments, which, as many of you will know, is one of the 5 big issues around which their 10-year strategy, Uniting the Movement, is framed. And as you'll be aware, today's webinar has been organised to coincide with the release of the 3rd iteration of the Active Design Guidance. We'll hear a bit more about that in just a second, but before that, I wanted to give a brief overview of the format for the rest of the webinar. So there'll be some more information, as I said, about the guidance, and then we'll hear from Chris Boardman and Dr Jeanelle de Gruchy, who will explain why active environments are important and why their organisations have been working together to produce the updated active design guidance. Following that, I'll introduce a few more expert panel members, and their names are on the screen. And then there'll be a time for discussion and questions with an emphasis on the practical adoption and implementation of the guidance. There will be an opportunity for me to put questions from the audience to our panel members, so please do ask your questions using the Q&A function, which hopefully you should be able to see on your screens. But first up, we have a short animation about Active Design 3, and then Nick Evans from Sport England will briefly highlight the key principles of the new edition of the guidance and explain key changes that have been made compared with the previous version.
We know that being active is important for our physical and mental health. But modern-day living often makes it difficult to fit activity into our daily lives. Creating environments that encourage us to be active can help us all to move more and reach the Chief Medical Officer's recommended amount of weekly physical activity. Active Design from Sport England, supported by Active Travel England and Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, helps those involved in designing and adapting our local neighbourhoods to create active environments. As well as supporting people to get more active, the creation of active environments can also help with other important agendas. Active Design consists of 10 principles. Activity for all is the foundational principle and is essential to the delivery of all the active design principles. It states that all environments should be designed to support physical activity equitably across all ages, ethnicities, gender and abilities. The remaining principles are grouped into 3 themes. 1. Supporting active travel. 2. Active, high-quality places and spaces. And 3. Creating and maintaining activity. Supporting active travel. In the past, many places have prioritised vehicles over people in their design, resulting in environments that can be unwelcoming or difficult to walk, wheel or cycle in. However, if a place is designed to support and encourage walking, cycling or wheeling, we are more likely to do so. It's the simplest and most inclusive way of getting us to incorporate activity into our daily lives. And it has great benefits for the environment too. Creating walkable communities, connected active travel routes and co-locating facilities are the key elements in supporting active travel. Active, high-quality places and spaces. We know that the places and spaces we interact with in our daily lives play an important role in how much activity we do. If designed well, this can support and encourage us to be more active. Yet the quality and the access to these areas can vary. A network of open spaces and well-designed quality places offer chances to socially connect and take active journeys, especially if there are features throughout the trip such as signage, bike parking, toilets, and seating. Creating a network of high-quality streets and open spaces and ensuring that these are easy to access through active travel networks can encourage and enable us to be active. Creating and maintaining activity. It's essential that once these spaces are created, they are well used and maintained and become part of the community. Designing spaces to be flexible and to accommodate changing and varied uses over time can stop a space from becoming unused. Maintaining our high-quality, flexible places and activating spaces is essential to encouraging physical activity for all. The 10 active design principles together can help develop active environments, supporting us all to be more healthy and active. Active design, making the active choice the easy choice for all.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and apologies for the technical glitch there. The joys of working with Teams Live. I'm Nick Evans. I'm Head of Planning and Active Environments at Sport England, and what I wanted to do now is just, as Fiona said, just take a few moments to take you through some of the changes with the new active design. But before I do that, I just want to take this opportunity to thank colleagues within Sport England, OHID and Active Travel England who've contributed to this work, as well as David Locke, who have pulled the work together and produced what we think is a great new iteration of the guide. And also some of you who are evidently on the webinar today who've contributed to either some of the workshops, the questionnaire, or have commented on the draft. And we really appreciate the effort you've done to actually contribute to it. And we really hope that has helped to shape the final guide. So just as we talk through some of the principles, just to put again a bit of this back into context. So since 2015, when we did the draft last time, we really recognised much more the importance of how the environments can influence creating healthy lifestyles and drive up physical activity. And as Fiona has said, within Uniting the Movement, we identify active environments as one of our big issues, 5 big issues, all about creating the spaces and places for people to be more active every day in their everyday lives. And why this is important? Well, we know from our Active Lives survey that actually 80% of the active minutes of an adult population per week are from a number of activities: walking, cycling, fitness and running. And when you start to think about these activities, where they actually take place, these take place in the places around in our local communities, the neighbourhoods. They're the streets, that's the running in the park, the yoga in the park, that's the walking to school, that's cycling to work as your daily commute. So it's really important that we build on that and ensure that our environments encourage physical activity back into everyday lives. So what has really changed from active design too? Well, one of the things we really realised is that we've really pushed up elevated activity for all as a foundation principle. And this really reflects the emphasis we placed within Uniting the Movement on tackling inequalities and the importance of that in providing for all. And what we've learned around some of this stuff we've learned around and the principles within that, we talk about listening, learning and co-design. And we've picked up a lot of that over the last few years from our work, for example, the TCPA, ZCD Architects, Grosvenor on voice opportunity power. Our work on some of the test and learn projects we've been doing, and we've got an example within a new guide of Kidlington Zoo trials of one of that bit. And also then our work on our local delivery pilot. So where we're working locally across the country, really meeting people where they're at, really listening to communities and really understanding and helping them shape their local environments. And secondly, we talk about creating the safe places. And this is really about linking to that foundation principle, really understanding the differences between people and the barriers they face. And also the unintended consequences we can often build into the built environment by actually designing where we think we're designing for everyone. We actually design for a few and exclude others. And a kind of more recent example has been the increased emphasis on ensuring our environments actually deliver for women and girls and ensuring we have access to these spaces. So thinking about the equity in terms of providing for in spaces and places. And I suppose we also talk about linking to other priorities, from our work through local authorities, often sport and physical activity is not necessarily a priority for a lot of local authorities. So what we've learned to do, what we've emphasised is really how we can piggyback off those major other agendas that local authorities and challenges that people are facing. So you'll see a lot in the guide in each of the sections around building out around environmental sustainability and climate change, tackling the inequalities I've said before, but also economic growth. We've also tried to make the guides much more easier to understand, and as the animation showed, we've grouped those principles up around 3 key areas. So supporting active travel, active high quality spaces and places, and creating and maintaining activity. And a lot of people through the last few years have, tell us much more, show me where this works, show us much more better bits of practice. So we've also created much more illustrative examples within the guide. So examples where applying active design town centres, a village, small urban extension, etc., to bring the guidance much more to life. We've peppered it with a lot more case studies than previously. And the last thing a lot of people told us, and what we've realised, is continuity. So you will see from the guidance that, the feedback is we've kept most of the principles, we've tweaked them somewhere, and you'll see in there, there's a nice little table which shows the principles against the previous active design principles, but also the National Model Design Code. So really next steps, well, we are launching today, as Fiona said, and the guide will be available after download after this session, but we're also working on further rollouts throughout the year. We're working, for example, with OHID at the moment, developing a series of targeted kind of on-site workshops for planners and health professionals. We're looking to build up the library of good practice around active design. So if you have any examples you want to put forward, then please contact us. And the email address is planningforsport@sportengland.org, and that will be available at the end of the webinar. So please keep in touch, and I will now pass you back to Fiona.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you for galloping through quite a lot of information there. I know he had a link on his slide. That link is also in the Q&A that all the participants should be able to access. So please do have a look at that, maybe after the webinar, not right this second, because next up we have two speakers who will each talk briefly about active design and why it's important, and why their organisations work together to help update the guidance. And so firstly, I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Chris Boardman in his capacity as Chair of Sport England and Active Travel England Chief Commissioner. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Fiona, and thanks Nick for that. I know you've been waiting to get this out for a long time now. I had to think long and hard about, because my work covers lots of different areas, and it's quite incestuous really with Active Travelling and Sport England, and this is where we've got real crossover between all of that activity I'm involved with, so it's particularly important to me. Bear with me for a moment if you wouldn't mind, because I'm going to zoom out before I zoom back in. And Jeanelle, forgive me, I'm going to step on your territory a little bit because it's inevitable. I'm going to talk a little bit about health, but the upside is I go first, so that's always an advantage in this space. Yeah, I think I hesitate because the framing of this is really important, because getting more people walking, riding and wheeling is not really the outcome that we want. It's the means to the outcome. And it might be pedantry, but I think that's important if we're going to link more people and more missions to this. So we know that health of our nation is frankly not going in the right direction, and it's resulting in an unsustainable burden on the health service. It's stressing the social fabric of our communities, and it's reducing the effectiveness of a workforce. I think it's 1 in 6 deaths in the UK are now directly related to inactivity, costing about £7.5 billion a year. So improving the health of a nation, I would posit, is the single biggest action that we could actually take for our happiness and our prosperity. But to sustainably reverse what some would frame, and I'd be one of them, as decline in our population's health, and to improve our productivity, we've got to offer people solutions that are easy choices. And you used that word earlier, Nick, easy choices to make that give back more than health. So no matter where we live or how much we earn, the activity that connects us all is transport. 60% of UK car journeys, all of them, so this is 30% of our carbon emissions as well, 60% of our journeys are less than 5 miles. And 40% of journeys in urban areas are less than 2. Where I worked in Greater Manchester, we had 250 million journeys a year of less than 1 kilometre being driven, which is embarrassing, but it's also quite exciting, the potential there. So we give a nation attractive options for making short journeys under their own steam, then we're going to reap significant rewards, and quickly. And I think that's politically important. If somebody starts walking and riding regularly to schools and shops and workplaces, then the benefits happen in weeks. So this, in a sense, pays back as we build. So also importantly, polls are now consistently showing, yesterday I looked at one, that cost of living, the NHS and climate are the people's priorities. Now, a long-term strategy to enable active travel, make exercise easy, speaks to all of those key areas. And our built environment is where that has to happen. The access to green space to do that, it's fundamental. Now, I don't normally mention the Dutch because we're sick of talking about it, but they've made active travel an easy and convenient option for their entire population. And I don't think it's coincidental that they enjoy obesity rates, for example, of less or almost half of what we have here in the UK. With cycling alone being shown to contribute about 17 billion to their economy. Now that, for most of us, feels a long way away from where we are, and it's hard to relate to, and it is as a nation. But there's places in the UK that are already enjoying those benefits, and they also show how little you have to change to make it, to make it work. The old one is Cambridge. You know, the Cambridge area, 37%, I think it is now, of all journeys are made actively, and that benefits the local economy by £215 million a year. Smaller, one that's fascinated me in the last few months, Kesgrave, a place in the suburbs of Ipswich, where 900 kids, 61% more than Holland, ride to school every day because it's convenient and it's easy. And Kesgrave, I also think, not coincidentally, has more kids with healthy body weight than the average. Their attendance is higher. Their attendance at after school clubs is high because the students have got transport independence. And one spin-off, which I hadn't even considered from all of this, their bullying rates were lower. And I asked the school teacher about this because I thought, what? She said, well, it tends not to happen in school, tends to happen after school and often on a bus where kids are effectively kettled without adult supervision. When you can come and go as you please, when you're transport, when you have that independence, it impacts so many things. And that was one I hadn't considered until it was put to me a few days ago. There are enough UK examples, I think, to show that when we create the environment, active travel options, when we make them easy and feel safe, people choose it, and it helps them and it helps the rest of us. And as well as easing pressure on the NHS by tackling inactivity, I think it's, I mean, Jeanelle, you might speak to this shortly, but I think it's on a par with smoking now in terms of being a killer. People who travel actively they're more productive, 2 less sick days a year for people who are regularly active. And imagine if we realised Cambridge levels of self-propelled travel for the whole country. So the reason I've just spent time looking at the wider benefits is that it only works if it's joined up. And this design guide we're talking about today is a big piece of the puzzle. It's why Active Travel England, who will also be a statutory consultee in a few days' time, actually, I've worked really closely with Sport England on this. And by way of an example, before I hand over, because we're about to be part of that planning system, we've just had a really good look around for where's best practice, what can we use at launch to make the point. And we came across a wonderful looking estate called Derwentthorpe, just outside of York. And it looks absolutely fantastic. And it'd actually been built to decarbonise quite a few years ago now. And there's a lake in the middle, and clearly all the streets have been designed with people first, not to efficiently move vehicles, and it looks great. So I went to look at the stats, and it hasn't really worked. It hasn't worked. It's beautiful, and it's just what you would imagine would work, but it isn't an island. So when I look deeper, the bus services aren't frequent enough to be enticing. There's no joined up attractive cycle route into the town, which is just 2 miles away. It's 2.5 miles to the station. And this could so easily be like Cambridge, where there's 6,000 place parking area just for bikes by the station. So the people in that estate feel they need to own a car, which they then need to store, and so on and so on. And it's a vicious circle. But that community and many others are just waiting to be activated, enabled to fulfill the potential, which is why I'm excited that whilst the politics ebbs and flows around us, there's a lot of agencies present here. We've got OHID as well, Active Travel and Sport England. It's quite a long list. I've counted 8 government departments that would massively benefit from this piece of work. They're all coming together to give people what they need, a complete vision for a different, frankly, more enjoyable way of living, of getting from homes to local destinations in a healthy way that saves us money and gives our kids transport independence. And that's why today is pretty exciting for me. I could go on, but you'll be glad to hear, Fiona, I'm going to stop now. And Jeanelle will probably put a lot more accurate, hopefully won't be contradicting me there. I hope I haven't made any mistakes, but I think we're all roughly on the same page. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's fantastic. And yes, I will quickly move on to our next speaker. But as I've mentioned, there will be time for questions and discussion later. So next up, we have Dr Jeanelle de Gruchy, who is Deputy Chief Medical Officer for England and co-lead of the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities. Welcome, Jeanelle.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks, Chris. And I kind of want to start by saying, well, my job is done. Once other people just giving all the really important reasons why we need to do stuff to improve the health of the nation, then I feel that that's fantastic, because you're right, Chris. We all need to do this together, and the outcome really is a healthier nation, but also one that, you use the word enjoyment, just that well-being, that sense of well-being is really, really important. And I'm not going to go through stats really on physical activity. I mean, you've covered quite a bit of why we really need to become more active ourselves for our physical and our mental health. And it's across the whole life course, right? It's from really, really young to really, really old. Let's not leave anyone out of this. It needs to have that inclusivity. And we all need to meet, in our as far as our ability goes, the UK CMO's guidelines on physical activity. And the key thing, which I think you emphasised, which I totally agree with, is that active design can make a significant contribution to a more active nation. And some of that is by enabling us to make those choices, to do things in a more active way. But quite often it's just so that we don't even have to make a choice. We just are more active in our daily lives, and it's got that benefit. But we know, and I think, Nick, you mentioned about the significant inequalities or disparities in how physically active adults and children are or can be or unable to be, because I think historically some groups have been really communities and areas have been really poorly served by the built environment and services, but there's just been a lack of consideration about what their barriers are, what prevents them from being active. And so I think, as the new guidance does emphasize, that the key part of active design being successful and really tackling those who are inactive is to make it easier for everyone to integrate and be physically active within their daily lives. I think that's really such a key principle. Part of the office, a key part of the Office of Health Improvement and Disparity, is that our work is evidence-based. And so what I'm really delighted about with this updated active design guidance is that it does reflect the latest evidence, and the evidence base has been informed by literature review of recent publications, studies, policy and design guidance. And that has identified gaps, new topic area where we can make improvements. And so I'm absolutely delighted. This is really key that we use. It has to be evidence-based. And so that's great that the guidance has been updated for that. Now, I was a director of public health for 13 years in a local authority, and actually was in Greater Manchester and Tameside. And so absolutely recognise how working together with planning colleagues and others, but really working with the needs of the communities that we serve in particular places, really understanding what their interaction with the place is really key to how we design, how we work with communities to encourage those healthier behaviour and create welcoming, active, safe spaces, as I said, for people of all ages, all communities. So to finish up, the document for me, I think, really captures how different national government departments, and Chris, you've counted them, so there are 8. But really, it's across government. We have to join up. And OHID is absolutely committed to playing its part as part of that, joining up and linking, as well as working with other agencies, local government, of course, how we can work together with this set of agreed principles for creating active spaces. So really delighted that OHID has collaborated with Sport England and Active Travel England on the project, and I look forward to ongoing collaborations and working together for delivering this vision. Thanks very much. Over to Fiona.
Thank you very much, Jeanelle, and yeah, really good. I think we'll pick up quite a few points that both Chris and Jeanelle have made in the questions in just a second. I must mention that I know there were some technical glitches, sadly, with our playing of the animation right at the earlier. It will be available online at the same link as the guidance, so I think that's been put in the Q&A, so please again do have a look at that, and we're sorry about those little technical problems that we had. Right, next I'm going to introduce our 3 additional members of our expert panel. They are Dinah Bornat, who's Director at ZCD Architects, Julia Foster, Managing Partner at David Locke Associates, and James Scott, Group Director of Strategy and Planning at Urban and Civic. So welcome to you 3 as well. I'm going to put some questions to the panel. The 3 of you that haven't had a chance to talk, do feel free to introduce yourselves slightly when I come to you, because I appreciate lots of our audience probably know of you and what you do, but just in case not. So first up, I'm conscious there has been quite an emphasis in all of our presentations so far around the need to work with communities to understand what they need and what will support them to have more active lives. And I know when Nick was talking that one of the changes between version 3 from 2 is that the first foundational principle around activity for all has been elevated. So Dinah, I'm going to come to you first. Co-design, really important. We talk about it a lot, but perhaps just wondered if you would reflect on your experience of why it's so important and how it will help us achieve active environments, please.
Yeah, I think it's so much part of how you design and how you think. And I just have to react to what Chris said about Derwent Thorpe, because it's really interesting. Our work started with a lot of observational work. And we went and visited Derwent Thorpe, which was seen as being a real exemplar. And it wasn't fully finished then, but I already saw through my eyes of when I used to ride my bike at the age of 4 that it wasn't going to work, because it was completely lacking in any doorstep play. So there's a nice play space, but there's a road in between the homes and the play space. And in fact, the road is a loop so that you've got really poor sight lines. And what's really interesting, going back to your question about co-design, Fiona, is that you can ask these questions of children really, really quickly. You can ask them, what's it like to play out where you live? How often do you go outside? What's your best experience? And what's encouraging is that you hear some really, really great stories. You know, you hear about kids talking about how much they love going out on their bikes, not always their bikes, how much they like playing out in the park, but not always. So some of those childhoods that we remember, they're still there, they're just not everywhere. And you start to realise and you make a connection between what they're telling you and where they live. And then you say, well, look, how can we make what you've already got better? How can we take the good stuff and make that even better? And how can we give you the space and the freedom to go out on your bike and to play with your friends for as long as you possibly can? Like some can say, you know, till it gets dark, till my mum and dad call me to get home. How can we make that for you? Because they're always asking for it. And so for us, co-design is really about starting with that experience and really trying to make a connection between what you see on the ground and what they're telling you. And what's incredibly good about working with children and young people is that if they can, they spend an enormous amount of time outside, much more than we've got time to do. And so they tend to know their neighbourhoods really, really well, like every scrap of it, every inch of it. And so they can kind of paint sometimes the best picture for you that the adults would probably have missed. So I think the thing about co-design is that whilst we think we do know all the answers, there's always questions, there's always things that they can teach you every time I meet them. So it's also incredibly energizing and exciting to work with children and young people because they've just got so much optimism. And I think that's what we have to work with.
Yes, optimism. Gosh, we all need some of that sometimes, don't we? Thank you, Dinah. So we've Nick again covered, and those of you that have lots of experience of the second edition will know there's 10 principles. Of course, place shaping and place making and active environments involves lots of different people with lots of different roles. So the next question, I'm going to come to Julia first. Who needs to be involved and what role can different groups and partners play in creating active environments?
Good afternoon, everyone. Julia Foster from David Locke Associates. We're planning consultants, work in planning, master planning, urban design and related areas. And it won't come as any surprise, therefore, that I'm going to try and champion the role of planning in this process and in embedding the active design principles. I think it's become very evident from what's already said that good master planning really is at the root of so many of the outcomes that Chris so eloquently identified in his impassioned cry for more of this to happen. And planning has made some progress. Nick alluded to the fact that certainly the understanding of this area and its importance has become established over recent years, helped by active design and many other guidance documents and many other champions for the cause. The NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, now fully embraces the agenda for healthy, inclusive and safe places. And this is really filtering into policy at all levels in the public sector. We're seeing it in corporate plans, we're seeing it in planning documents, we're seeing it in design guidance up and down the country. But I have to be honest and say that there has been a bit of a tendency for this to result in projects that deliver the spaces and places we need to be branded active with a few bolt-on goodies and a bit of gloss on the same old. I think those that really know, understand and want to see this really affect change across the whole nation recognise that active design principles need to be deeply embedded and they need to be standard practice in all aspects of what we do. With a sort of shift to the dial and a bit of refocusing, so much of what is already being planned and is likely to emerge over the next few years can deliver so much more than we've seen. I have to be eternally hopeful that we're right on the cusp of a re-energising of the planning system to respond to the really critical drivers actually that Chris alluded to, climate, the housing crisis, the ageing population, health and inequality are all there and all need to be intertwined and tackled in a very comprehensive way. Sustainable placemaking and regeneration is absolutely core to that, and active design is so intertwined with all those things. All those are priorities. And many other aspects of planning that we're trying so hard to bring forward, biodiversity net gain, reducing the amount of carbon loaded tarmac in new developments. All these things relate to and are benefited by taking a comprehensive approach to these issues through planning. That's where I'd start. I think I'm going to pass back to Chris, who's going to talk a little bit more about the role of Active Travel England in delivering.
I didn't know I was actually. That's me paying attention to the agenda for you there. But it's been absolutely fascinating. I mean, just very whistle-stop tour for people who don't know. So the way so Chair of Sport England and Active Travel Commissioner for England. So the way I see it is Active Travel England makes safe space. Sport England activates the space. That's very crudely how how these two agencies work together. And the fact that Sport England has a planning capability facility is sensational, because we have a bigger virtual team to actually work on this. So the goals for Active Travel England are 50% of all journeys to be cycled and walked by 2030. in towns and cities. So it's a very simple and measurable outcome that we have to achieve. And people are only going to do that if it's easy. So my job is much more, dare I say it, political than it is infrastructure and technical. We know how to do it, but we have to deal with people's fear of change. And, you know, even what I've got now is a bit crap. I know I can deal with it. And if you give me something else, it might not. I'm worried about that. That might damage my life in some way, stop me doing something that I like. So fear of change is absolutely huge. So that co-design element is enormous. And one of the biggest lessons I learned was in Greater Manchester, where I went around all of the local districts when I started working for Andy Burnham, and we gave them the pen. They chose who was in the room, a blank piece of paper, and said, where do you live? Would you ride a bike outside your house? And they kind of looked at each other suspiciously and went, yes. I think this is a trick question. Would you ride to the shop? No. Why not? Well, at the end of my road, and there was normally a canal or something in the way. What about on the other side? Yeah, that's okay. All right, what would you need to get across there? Write that down on the map. And then we just asked a series of questions. Where are the shops? Where are the schools? Which way would you go if it was your choice? And they scribbled on the map, and people got more and more involved. And then over the course of an hour and a half, this happened 10 times with 10 different councils. They sat back and went, actually, this is doable. And then we put that online as a draft. We put that online. They're very courageous. We put it all together. They put it online as a draft, and the public could say anything they wanted, which obviously makes people nervous. Anything you want. And it was a 1,000-mile draft that we put online for the whole city region. And the biggest complaint we got, we had 4,000 comments in a matter of hours. The biggest complaint was, where's our bit? And so the map expanded because people didn't want to be left out. And by the end of that process, we had a 1,800 network plan for a 1,800 mile network. And everybody had been positive about it, and we hadn't touched a pen, and that was absolutely key to getting that plan adopted, and it's now in the process of being implemented. So that's the Active Travel England bit of the job. What I really want to work with on Sport England, and it already is in lots of places, is how do we enable people? So down in on the south coast in Essex, I was there at Jaywick, very deprived community, unbelievably deprived. 1 hour, just over an hour from London, beautiful beach, really deprived area. And Sport England has put, I think, there's a £6 million project providing bikes, up to 5,000 bikes for people in the area who simply can't afford it. Active Travel England's put in some bits of tarmac that link up 3 different villages, and it's already having an impact, both socially and on health, and that's really an exciting opportunity. So I'll again, Fiona, I could go on and on, so I'll better stop there.
Thank you, Chris. But Jeanelle, can I come to you and ask you the same question around the role of different partners and groups, and who needs to be involved, and perhaps you can reflect on both your local authority experience as well as your national role.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks, Chris. And yes, as I mentioned, as a local director of public health, I was there with the tables and pens and the maps and so on. So I can definitely corroborate what you were saying and the importance of those communities, which is a theme that's come through today. And I think with Office of Health Improvement and Disparities, so we are within the Department of Health and Social Care. And we are the Chief Medical Officer, who, as you know, is very, very keen on this agenda, and is on the advisory committee of the Active Travel England, is really committed to this. So Chris Whitty does give that strong push and that strong leadership in terms of OHID's role within this agenda. Our Planning Healthy Places and Communities team are active in the space and have been in terms of supporting the guidance and working across with the other government departments, particularly with DLUC. And then we've also got regional directors of public health, and they've got strong links to those directors of public health in local authority. So we've got a real reach through into local government, local directors of public health, and so that we can ensure that we can support and encourage and enable. And I think the guidance is a key part of us doing that and playing that role with local authorities. Back to you, Fiona.
Thank you. And so in the guidance, as again, following the sort of experience of the second one, people will see that there are case studies in the new iteration. So trying to highlight where it's already happening, this is possible, but we will come on to challenges in a couple of questions' time. We know it's not easy. But coming to James, please, could you talk a little bit about an example or two where active design is already being used to good effect and what outcomes have been seen?
Sure, and thank you very much indeed. So James Scott from Urban and Civic, we're large-scale master developers of new communities, and having worked with the previous iteration of the guidance, it's an enormous privilege to see one of our sites, Halton, given over as an example in this new guidance, and to have scored a perfect 10 in terms of achieving 10 out of 10 and hitting all of the different active design principles. And that's been no accident, because as Julia said earlier, it is about embedding it in the absolute fundamentals of the site itself and integrating it with a whole range of wider agendas, such as the ecology, the green spaces, the connectivity through to the schools, the activation of spaces such as community spaces for wider events than just community meetings. The community spaces on our sites are regularly in use for kettlebell classes, mum's yoga, you name it. It's a continuous stream of activity. So actually that element of embedding those principles is fundamental, and you've got to start at the earliest stage of the outline planning and work through as you go through phase by phase into delivery. Key points for us are visibility. You don't just have to provide the routes, you actually have to make it clear that you can get from A to B easily. That means you need viewing corridors of key destinations such as the schools. That actually means that people get out of their homes and onto the footpaths or the cycleways and know that they can get to their destination easy. Once you've embedded that principle in people's minds, they're prepared to take more circuitous routes, but actually allowing them to see it. We've done surveys as well, following up on the delivery with the Quality of Life Foundation. It's been fascinating, again, taking Jeanelle's point about all ages, to hearing the views of older residents, which is that they love the ability they can walk out of their doors and they can walk through these corridors, but there are benches at sufficient frequency so that they know that they can take a rest as and when they need to. And furthermore, those benches need to have arms so that they can push themselves back up again in order to carry on the walk. Little factors like that. Talking to school children has been fundamental in terms of evolving that design further. And again, fascinating when we had a group of girls from various different local schools come to the site and do a workshop with us and start talking about playgrounds and how, as children, they loved to socialize on the swings, but as they get older, those swings are too small for them and they feel constrained and awkward in a space that they used to feel happy and confident, and so they don't go to those spaces. And parents of younger children feel slightly awkward if older children are around, but you can design therefore in playgrounds that meet wider needs if you understand those points. So active design principles, fundamental, need to be embedded from the earliest stages. They produce better places, they produce holistically healthier places, and they produce more valuable places. So if you don't believe the cynical developer, then there is a very good reason as to why you should be embedding these principles as well.
Thank you, James. And Julia, do you want to add anything from your direct experience as well?
I suppose I'm normally standing right next to James shouting, trumpeting strategic big sites, but I'm going to just change the record for a moment. And that's just to highlight that actually the latest version of active design also has quite a lot of focus on the other challenges of delivering active design in town centres, in urban areas and in smaller communities and villages. And there really are challenges in some of those locations, particularly town centres, and huge opportunity at the moment. We're going to have to see a remodelling and a complete functional change to the nature of town centres as uses evolve and offices are no longer needed in the quantity and form that they are, and retail is heading in a very different direction. This is an opportunity to really reclaim space within centres for different activities, for different uses, for communities, and we're seeing an intensity of residential development turning into central areas, and we need to think about what that means for how people living in centres find what they need on their doorsteps. And there's a couple of great examples in the document, work that has been going on at Stevenage, which has followed through from local policy in the local plan, ambition to deliver change within the centre, through a whole cast of partnerships coming forward, investment coming from many different sources to deliver some really important changes with this agenda right at the heart of it. And you'll see some pictures and some examples of things delivered on the ground, which are really beginning to make a difference to vacancy rates, to the number of people using the centre, and bringing people back to living within centres. So I think that's a really important focus. I will just pick up on something Chris said earlier. Another scheme we've been working on very recently in Staines, where they're a little bit earlier in the process of bringing forward a town centre regeneration strategy, but exactly the point that was made. There's a local cycle walking infrastructure plan in that location, which kind of failed the minute it got to the bounds of the town centre because they didn't quite know how to connect it up. So really important strategy coming forward for taking advantage of the fact that the authorities are being quite forward thinking about that aspect of active design, and we need to work quite hard to bring that connectivity through complicated urban areas, difficult urban areas with all the challenges of land assembly and delivery, but it's worthwhile investment to bring forward these principles in those kinds of locations. Fiona, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. And James, just to come back to you again, you mentioned about the need to embed the principles on site, and from the start, but how do we embed the active design principles in the commercial sector more broadly? How do we make sure it's the norm rather than the exception?
Well, the key really has to be that, in essence, you create better places and therefore you create more valuable places. I mean, we're going to come on to talk some of the contraindications in the system which create challenges to doing so in a bit. But fundamentally, this starts with local authorities embedding these within their local plans, within their design guidance for areas. As Julia rightly said, I mean, I have the privilege of talking about very large scale sites, but actually these all need to be joined up when you're talking about smaller scale sites or areas of towns, and therefore there is a fundamental importance on local authorities in terms of setting that mandate down as to what is required of land uses within more constrained areas as part of a combined and conjoined network. So in essence, for us, it is a no-brainer, because it goes to the fact that, you know, absolutely we see the benefit of it, and then if you can't see that in terms of the pure economics of the site itself and also in the ambition to create great places, then local authorities and other agencies need to be far more forthright in the way in which they mandate these elements as being not nice to haves, but fundamental elements of good design that are embedded from day one. And I'm very keen in due course to talk about some of those contraindications and challenges in the system, because they come from all different directions, and you end up often sort of trying to wade through treacle to do the right thing. And if we can address those as well, then we're on to a real winner here.
Thank you. And Julia, I know we'd be interested in your thoughts on how we embed this and pick up perhaps on some of what James has said, but also I know we're going to slightly merge two questions together here, slightly unfairly, but I know you've also already started mentioning some of the challenges of embedding the active design principles, including but not limited to in town centres. So could you reflect on how we really embed this within the commercial sector, and perhaps, you know, draw on your role and the work that you've done, and then also maybe if you wanted to pick up any more about the points you're already starting to make about the challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose again, just to go to the opposite end of the spectrum, and I think there's some really quite interesting examples in the document about looking at the really granular, fine-grained interventions that can really make quite big differences without huge costs attached to them, and can easily be embedded in development schemes that might be financially quite challenging, viability challenged. There are examples, particularly in the commercial case studies, around workplace and small interventions and changes that can be made to encourage activity in workplaces and around workplaces. There's example from the RAL and Daresbury laboratory site, where really quite modest schemes to introduce cycle hubs, to introduce facilities for ping pong. We see that in shopping centres and other locations happening. These things are things that are really quite easy to deliver as part of wider investment and development schemes. And again, just going back to thinking about the realities of the way people now live their lives. It's not always possible to hop your child on a bike and take them to school in the morning. There isn't always time. We know that, Fiona, don't we? But thinking about the way people's lives work, and when we have sat outside a sports centre having dropped our children off for an hour of swimming or netball or whatever it may be, thinking about the opportunity to create space for parents to get out of their cars, not play Candy Crush for half an hour, but go for a walk, go for a run. Connecting places up, connecting activities up, again, doesn't necessarily cost much money, doesn't take much time and effort, but can make a big difference. And I think those are things that we can easily embed in commercial activities in our day-to-day work. Just coming to your point on challenges, and I'll try and be quite quick on this, because I think this is probably where there's probably going to be most interest from many others as well. There's obviously a mountain of guidance on this stuff now, and here's another one. Great as it is, we have to really start focusing now on delivery and embedding this more widely. The great joy in seeing active design evolve over the years is now having this great pile of good practice accumulated and represented in the document. We need to demonstrate its worth and its value, and we need to demonstrate that obviously to communities, and we need to see that coming through in outcomes for health, etc. But we also, as James mentioned, need to make it clear that there is investment value in all this. The latest version of active design does try to shift the focus. It provides lots of good practice, and it provides tools to help practitioners. But they need a lot more. We've been depleting our planning departments and our local authorities for so many years. So many practitioners are really ill-equipped, disillusioned, don't have the skills and the training really to deal with a multitude of issues around this. We need to equip them, lead them, and help them implement this. It's great to see such powerful voices behind this document. Their names are on the bottom, and there are many more on this call, but we've got to really promote this through government and see this become core and central to all of the investment decisions that are made around the built environment, but many other infrastructure sectors too.
Thank you, Julia. And Dinah, what do let's be honest, it is challenging at times. What would you highlight?
I'm always the optimist. I think the thing is, I think people are scared of engagement. I know that's sort of like, I'm an architect, right? So I'm designing places, and I'm designing buildings, and I'm designing master plans and stuff. So I know how hard it is. People are scared of asking other people what they think, because they think that they're not going to be able to live up to what they want. Like I start all my projects with people terrified that I'm just going to kind of walk into them and promise things that I'm not going to be, the design team's not going to be able to deliver. And I'm like, trust me, that's not what we're going to do. Isn't it? There would be no point asking people if they want. I love what children say. I want. They said it to me this morning. In the playground, I want lions and tigers. I was like, brilliant, say that. It sounds fantastic, and everyone will give it a laugh. But you're not going to get lions and tigers in the playground. But they're realistic. We're realistic. I think the thing is, the problem with designing and not engaging people is that you might think that they're one of the things you've got to deal with once you've dealt with the infrastructure, once you've dealt with the highways. And let's not leave these guys out, because they're a major concern. And once we've dealt with all the other things that we've learned at university and to go through. But actually, we're designing for people, right? That's all we're really doing, and nature and stuff. And if we don't work with other people, we're only drawing on our own lived experience. We can't do it any other way. So we're working on a project in Earls Court, which is the biggest development site in London at the moment. And we're working with a panel, I don't think anyone's ever done this before, of teenagers and adults together, and people with disabilities, and people who are neurodiverse. And honestly, the conversations that come out of that have really got us all thinking in a different way, so that when we, as the designers, are designing that place, we're not just drawing from our own physical experiences, however latent they might be. I'm not the person with the pen in my hand on this particular project, but those actual people are in my mind when I'm talking to the other design team, and they're in their minds as well, because they come to all the sessions. So, you know, engagement isn't a thing that happens over here so that we can get planning permission. Engagement is the way we need to design. And so the challenges are money, but like on big development sites, I mean, it's just pennies. The challenges are getting people into the room. Here's a really, really easy thing to do. You just need to pay them. That makes an enormous difference. Then you just don't get the angry voices. You get people that you need to talk to. The challenges are framing it around those that aren't really often heard. So how do you make it about inclusivity? Well, this panel at Earls Court is framed around that principle, and the conversations are fascinating. Teenagers are talking to older people. We had a session recently where an older woman said, I feel invisible, and a teenage boy said, I feel scared of other teenagers, and I realise I look scary and intimidating. And to have a conversation like that with a group of people in the room like that about how they enjoy parks and open spaces and can get around. And then the next level they take it to is they talk about people having different needs throughout the day. And I think that's really interesting. Like, one person might want to be really sporty, and then they might need to go and sit somewhere secluded to kind of like cool down a bit. It's not about this person needs that thing and this person needs that thing. We all need like huge variety and choice. And I've only learned that really through talking to people who are able to articulate it, rather than worrying about what people will think and whether that person's needs are being met and that person's needs are being met. And I think, so I would just say to people, honestly, engagement just opens up so many opportunities and helps us do it better. Don't be scared of it because people are going to fire shots at you and throw eggs at you. Obviously, be careful about how you frame questions. Don't promise the world, but start with people's lives. They want to be heard. So, sorry, I said a lot, but I think you're right. There are challenges, but we need to get it into planning policy, national planning policy. We should be talking to people. It should be absolutely mandatory.
Thank you very much. And James, just same to you. You know, we want people to be ambitious, but we also need to recognise there are challenges with delivering this. So just your perspective on behalf of Urban and Civic.
Well, I thought I'd give you three very specific examples of challenges, and they're all surmountable, but they do take energy and effort to do so. The first is that the Sports England guidance for a community sports hall is that it needs to be bigger with more facilities than a secondary school sports hall. So there is a mismatch between the DFE and Sports England as to relevant standards and sizes. We had this at Halton, and we wanted the sports hall to be a community sports hall. So we paid over the school contribution for the extension of that sports hall to be a community sports hall and put a community use agreement in place. Now, if that wasn't a mismatch, if there was an alignment there, you may therefore get many more co-use facilities coming forward which meet wider ambitions. The second is in relation to the long-standing and now increasingly historic, I'm pleased to say, prioritisation of car-borne transport as part of any transport assessment for large-scale strategic schemes. That does seem to be changing, I'm pleased to say, with more county councils looking for strategic transport, sustainable transport options primarily, and being prepared to accept that there may be some traffic jams, but the traffic jams might not necessarily be a bad thing in terms of encouraging people that a walking and cycling route is a more direct and efficient way of doing things. And the third is that this goes actually to healthcare, which is that in delivering large-scale schemes, schools are reasonably straightforward. Health centres are one of the most difficult things to actually negotiate and agree and bring forward, because the supply of health centres through the primary care trusts and through the GP's individual business models is actually inhibiting a degree of entrepreneurialism and ambition to create broader health centres with physiotherapy and wider activities which can integrate better and more fully into the community and the ambitions of this design guidance. So there are three examples of real life challenges in terms of delivering large scale strategic sites, and in fact more broadly other sites as well, but which could therefore create much better and more fundamentally sort of integrated places if we could bang some heads together.
Thank you, James. And thank you, everybody, for putting your questions. Hopefully we're covering some of the themes, and we will pick up some more in just a second. But I just want to come back to Chris. We heard on the animation, and we've heard through the discussion of the multiple benefits of active design and active environment. So yes, there's been an emphasis on health and well-being, but we have touched on lots of other benefits as well, not least in potentially helping places reduce carbon emissions. So I just wondered, if you could just talk a little bit about some of those multiple benefits that, so if there's anybody out there that hasn't been convinced so far, will really understand why this is a no-brainer.
Thanks. I'll come back to something when I said at the start, and I mentioned being a bit of a pedant, really, that's a means to an end. I think if you ask people if they want more cycling, you'll get a proportion that will go no. If you ask them if they want transport independence for their kids, they'd go yes. Would you like to not have to do the school run every day? It's only 2 miles away. Yes. What would you need for that to happen? Well, they'd have to be safe, and they'd have to be, do you mean like this? So we're often on the same page, but we don't actually realise it. I think the key for me all the way along, and also for my own mental health, has been I don't own the answers, I own the questions. And I learned that, and I haven't got time for the story, but I learned that in a wind tunnel with athletes, when we actually stopped telling them what was best and let them go and explore for themselves. And they ended up in exactly the same place, but they owned the outcome. So in Greater Manchester, the first thing that I did when I worked there was go and work out what cost to travel as you are now. And it was £3.75 billion a year. The region is paying I think it's £500,000 a week treating inactivity related illness. So the question is, can you afford that? And then it's okay, well, road capacity, the way you're going at the moment, this is going to be the increase in the amount of cars. Can you cope with that? Decarbonisation, your region, as most other regions, you have to drive 25% less, shrink everything that's left and electrify it, but 25% less. You can't force people to do that. Do you want to give, you're either going to miss your target, or you have to give people attractive alternatives. What do you want to do? I mean, ultimately, the status quo is a choice as well. Do you want to continue with it? So I think by owning the questions is really important. But we all want the same outcome. And if the answer to getting that was pogo sticks or driving, then I'd be all over pogo sticks and driving. It just happens to be getting around under your own steam gives more benefits. So whatever gets us the healthy people, then who is it I'm speaking to and what's in their way? And when James just mentioned, perhaps traffic jams are not a bad thing. I agree with James. There's got to be here's an attractive alternative, and this is really not nice, is it? But if I said that to a politician, they wouldn't hear anything I said after that, because I'm too scared of what that'll do to the vote. But we can get the same outcome by just reframing the question, and I think that's where the fascination has been with me. But in terms of other alternatives, well, you pick a crisis, just pick one. Want to use less oil? Need to help people save money? Need to improve the health of the population? And we can legitimately and authentically stand on that soapbox, because this is a product, if you like, that speaks to all of those issues, which is really quite exciting and frustrating in equal measure, really, that we actually have to campaign for it. So yeah, I think if I was going to distill that down to one answer that's shorter than the one I've just given, it would be what outcome do you want, and is what you're doing getting you closer or further away from that?
Okay, thank you very much. And Jeanelle, I'm just going to come back to you if that's all right as well. So funding and resourcing has been touched on, but it would be remiss of me if I weren't to raise it again. I think I'm very mindful that much of our audience probably works at the local level and will recognise that local authorities are struggling with resourcing and capacity. So I guess from OHID's point of view and your point of view, how can the planning sector work with wider sectors? What opportunities are there to actually help the delivery of active design principles?
Thanks, Fiona. And yeah, I fully recognise how difficult it is in terms of funding, and it was mentioned earlier about even just having planning capacity in local authorities. I do think that thinking about being open to actively approaching and engaging with directors of public health who are based within local government and their teams. I mean, directors of public health have no statutory role in planning, but we're really good at stakeholder collaboration, partnership working, having those links into communities, but and thinking about inequalities and different communities and their needs, their health needs and well-being needs, mental health needs. They also have that link, I think, to the NHS integrated care partnerships. And I think picking up what James was saying, I can fully recognise how difficult it is in terms of health service, NHS health services, and that is an important part of a community. But so I think going through and linking up with the integrated care partnerships might be one way of doing that. But certainly directors of public health can support the ways of thinking and framing in terms of those positive outcomes for communities that Chris has said, because I really think, Chris, I mean, it is about how you frame it, how you enable people to see those outcomes that they really do want, and what the barriers are that collectively together we can try and address those challenges, we can try and address so that we can work together to get that win-win with our communities within, Fiona, current resources. I'm afraid I don't have the money bag answer, but it is more about working together to get the win-win and just being more efficient and how we do that together. And particularly what Diana said, it has to be with communities, because that's the way you do it effectively, I think.
Thank you. So we perhaps inevitably have had a question about whether or not the guidance covers rural areas. I think people, we've touched on new communities and we've touched on town centre regeneration, but of course at times it will be more challenging perhaps to increase walking and cycling in rural areas to the extent that we might be able to in urban areas. But Julia, hopefully I can come to you just to highlight to what extent the guidance does help tackle some of those challenges.
Thanks, Fiona. Yes, in the new and improved guidance, there is a new section which actually looks at different typologies of place and the application of the principles to different environments across the spectrum, right from city centre out to an example which is actually a rural village environment. I'm not going to make claims that it has got the answer to everything, but as a high level interpretation of the principles, it demonstrates the sorts of things that village communities might want to think about in terms of adapting and applying the principles in those kinds of locations. And I think probably the important thing to acknowledge is this is informing a planning process. And the one thing that smaller communities have is often the ability to engage with the planning process through neighbourhood planning and to think about how they might want to deliver some of the things that active design is seeking to achieve. And I think there's a very good opportunity in taking a very positive approach to neighbourhood planning to perhaps see communities coming together around this agenda and setting out their stall for what they might like to see achieved. And there are various ways that can then be delivered and can happen in a smaller community, in a village environment. And I think it'd be really interesting actually to think about looking at case studies for how that might work going forward, which I know is something Sport England are particularly keen to do in bringing together a greater body of good practice.
Thank you, Julia. We've also had a question, well, we've already touched on in the discussion the challenge of recognising that there's multiple government departments that have a role in delivering active environments, and of course that's also relevant at the local area. Dinah, I'm going to put this one to you first of all, but other panel members do wave at me if you're keen to come in. So that there is a question about the challenge at the local level, recognising that different parts of a local authority, even more so in two-tier local authorities, have different roles in trying to deliver this, and that's correctly a challenge and a barrier at times. And I just wondered if, from your experience, when you are working with local authorities, how do we try and bring those different parts together?
It's really, really difficult, isn't it? Because I do work with lots of local authorities, particularly across London, but also around the country. And I think they would be the first to admit they can be really siloed. And I mean, sometimes it makes you laugh. I've actually had them sitting next to each other and then kind of turning and going, do you know the answer to this question that I'm trying to solve? That the culture of talking to each other is really difficult. I think what's really interesting, and if I can just be a bit critical of the current government, we had an active design approach from CABE about 9 years ago. We were going in this direction. In fact, that was around Design Council time when CABE was sort of subsumed into the Design Council. We've been waiting for this for a long time, and I know Sport England have been working on it, but it does seem bizarre that it has to come from a sports point of view and not a kind of a national design point of view. Thank you for Sport England for championing this and going beyond the kind of standard what you would expect. But I think we see really good leadership. I see really good leadership in some councils, and officers still confused by what it is they want to be doing. And I think someone mentioned before, councillors as well, like really concerned with basically bringing home the vote. And if that's about car parking and car ownership and all the very, very difficult challenges that we will face in local and in national elections around some really tough issues, I think that shows really what we're up against. And I think what I always say is we have to show what good looks like. We have to paint the picture. And I think that's why I really like the guides, because one of the things I noticed on page 23 or 63, I wrote it down, is there's a picture of a community. I always get very specific as an architect, and it shows some homes around a space, and that space is really well connected to some other homes. And it's that sort of level of detail and that kind of, this is what good looks like. And also saying to people, go out and have a look around and check when you see good. And kind of, so I mean, I've had so many presentations in local authorities where you can bring public health in, you can bring the streets teams in, you can bring the highways in, but everybody has to get behind this, don't they? And I think that's what's great about this guide. It's detailed, it's long, it's got vision, but it shows what good looks like. I think sometimes we also worry a lot about case studies to lead the way, and sometimes the answer might be, we're not really doing this brilliantly anyway yet. So we might not have case studies. we might need to go to Holland. It'd be really nice if we could stop having to go to Holland every time we wanted to see what good looks like. But we had some really good stuff here. So we need to build those exemplars, don't we? And we need to, and I've worked on a few tricky ones recently where we've got pushed back, but it is hard. It's hard working with local authorities. I think some developers can be a bit more progressive sometimes, so we've got to bring the private sector in as well. They might be a little bit less risk averse. but we've got all sorts of issues around procurement and land value, and we are, you know, it's not easy, but this, I think this guidance is good. I think it's good urban design, and I think Sport England needs to really push it out there to all of us urban designers.
Great, thank you very much. Absolutely, and I'm conscious that we've all got a role in helping to promote the guidance, haven't we, through our various networks. So hopefully this is the start of, as Nick said in one of his slides, this is the start of the rollout. So thank you, Dinah. Now, Chris, I'm going to come back to you. I'm going to sort of smush two questions that we've been asked together, and hopefully it will still make sense. So we've been asked about the role of Active Travel England working along highways in the planning process, and to what extent those two agencies, or the elements of those two agencies, can work together, and sort of related but not totally, who should be the lead agency or organisation championing and driving active design principles locally?
Well, the second one's quite tough. The first one's relatively straightforward, to be honest. Highways England, our relationship is actually really good. We have an MOU already in place. Nick Harris, the CEO, is great. They recognise that they are both the solution and the problem so far. I mean, it's a huge cause of severance, the major roads, and they're really keen to do something with it, meaningful. They've got pockets of pieces of work they've done really good, but because Active Travel England now exists, suddenly there's a voice at various tables actually just saying, well, actually we could do that this way and it'd be a lot easier, and that in and of itself is already making a really big difference. So that's a really positive story. In terms of regionally, you mentioned councillors. Well, they have to be supported. Their problems have to be your problems, and it's got to be a local solution for local people. But I think the clarity here is and I touched on it before, local people, where we do well, I think, and Dinah's already touched on this, is we've got to give people the right choices. A lot of the people we're speaking to, for me, I've got a background when I was a child. My first rite of passage was to be able to ride a bike. I could extend my territory and go to a different park and go a bit further. A lot of kids now have never had that. So when we say, what do you want? There's a big chunk here that they don't know what they don't know. So we've got to be careful to frame it so they understand. And pictures is great. I mean, you've just touched on that as well. Look at this picture. Would you like this for you and your kids? Yes, I would, because it's not necessarily experience from their own past now. So local decisions have got to be taken locally. One of the issues that I found working regionally was one side of the road is managed by a different council to the other side of the road. And so that kind of localized, joined up thinking is really important, and how that can be incentivized rather than a forced way of working is actually the cash follows the partnership working. If you're doing this really well together, you've agreed for a whole region what your plan is, and it goes across borders just like journeys do, and you're going to manage it in that way, then we back people that are thinking like that. And that in itself, back to Dinah's point, that creates an example that we can then use somewhere else, where a local authority got together with the next local authority and how they had a really good joined up strategy and a hierarchy of road user. And so I think regionally, locally, it's got to be managed that way, and the more efficiently it's done, then the more we back them to do it, and we create examples. Highways England and other agencies within the Department for Transport were on it actually, and it's going suspiciously well at the moment.
Thank you. And James, if I could come to you, because I appreciate you come at this from a slightly different direction, but from your experience as a user of the planning system and trying to create these places, where, who would you envisage or like to see, I guess, championing or leading the drive to really embed these principles locally?
I mean, I think everybody's right when they say the councillors need to own and drive the principles, but there are, as Chris alluded to, between car-borne transport and more sustainable methods of transport, quite a big political arbitrage at the moment in terms of postbag, but I think the very sort of enlightened sort of local authorities now that you are seeing, and a significant number of officers across both local authorities, Highways England, County Council highway departments, they all get it. They all get the big ambition, the big outcome. It's about how you get there. And actually, that's why this design guide is so helpful. This design guidance is so helpful in the way it's set out, as well as the content that it contains, because it gives people genuinely useful illustrations and steps and pointers that can help embed within emerging local plans, emerging transport strategies. And really, then, in terms of local people, you know, this is a document. This isn't one of these impenetrable planning documents, which, to be quite frank, you need a PhD and the enthusiasm of the uninitiated to wade your way through it. This is actually a document that a member of the public could pick up and read. And I really hope that there are members of the public that pick this document up and turn up at their local authority and go, but this is what Sports England are saying. Why aren't we able to do this? This doesn't seem like rocket science, does it? So it takes, you know, it takes a team, doesn't it, to actually achieve change, and that has to come from multiple different directions. But this document actually is one that can be used across the board and across stakeholders. So that's why, yeah, I think it's such a useful addition to the information available.
Thank you, James. And I think, as I think it was Julia mentioned, neighbourhood planning as well. I think, as you say, hopefully the guide is accessible enough that actually people thinking about neighbourhood plans should be looking at as well. I'm just going to stick with you for a second, James, because somebody we know resourcing is a challenge. I've touched on that already, but just people are interested in your views again about how can we make sure that there is some funding available. You know, what is the role of the private sector in trying to actually you know, help embed active design in the schemes coming forward, but also perhaps in picking up with some of what Dinah's said about actually making sure there's that genuine co-creation as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think this can be on large scale schemes certainly handled by the private sector. Dinah's, it's not quite pennies, but it is certainly pounds well spent in terms of ensuring that you achieve a really strong place. I think the elements which actually are often, because you're embedding it into the design from the outset, and that's actually sort of therefore fundamental to the way in which you're bringing about the place. The bits that we need to think about in addition then are the ongoing activations, the ongoing encouragements. So we've had green travel plans as part of planning for years and years and years, and actively going out and working with the community to promote the sustainable routes and the sustainable methods, working with local bike shops to be able to come and have workshops on sites in order to promote and encourage and see bikes being far more visible and active within the community, working with local funds that are available, whereby we talked about it earlier, whereby you are able to encourage bike ownership within an area. Again, all of these things are doable. Actually having visibility as to all the initiatives that are within an area is often quite challenging to draw all those different strands together. If we could find a better way of being able to sort of push all of those up above the parapet wall so people could see them and plug into them, because what developers logically want to do is leverage their investment for a wider benefit. They're putting the investment in, they're making a change, and if they can use that investment to leverage a wider benefit, that is a positive thing, both from a doing things right perspective, but also for the cynical, as I say, the more Machiavellian, actually you're more likely to get your consent that way by leveraging the investment into the wider community and allowing that wider benefit to be seen. But you've got to understand what's out there. Originating a scheme is far more difficult, much more difficult than actually broadening or pump priming a scheme that's there, which is being worked within the community. So we've got to encourage all of those different elements. Yeah, I mean, a development per se should be able to handle the core principles in here within its basic budget, and then ongoing elements are what we need to work on, wider community schemes across areas.
Thank you, James. So we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm just keen to make sure I allow enough time to ask all of our panel members, I think, for one key message for our audience today. So we know our audience is probably quite, it's both large and varied, but assuming that people have come to this because they've got an interest in active design and they're keen to create visionary places, whether that's regenerating existing ones or creating new ones, what would be your key message for our audience today? So who will I come to first? Jeanelle, could I come to you first, please?
Thanks, Fiona, and I think the webinar has been fantastic, and hearing people's experiences, different voices. I think if I can have the floor again, just to mention the role of the local directors of public health, the public health teams, their knowledge of communities and their willingness to be part of helping around active design, providing some of that evidence, the evidence base, both the health needs, but also around physical activity, and those communities that might be more inactive, that we really do need to help and support through our active design to get everyone active, to get an active nation.
Thank you very much, Jeanelle. And Julia, what would yours be?
I suppose it's about being positive and keep plugging away at this. And there's lots of questions come up about, you know, the car drivers and the real barrier that presents to some of these ambitions. But there are really, really good examples where that is being overcome successfully. And you know, one of Urban and Civic sites at Waterbeach is about to deliver a school where there is no direct car access for parents dropping off children to that school. It will only be accessible by foot and on cycles. So this is happening in a commercial development in a location with a local authority, the developer, and all of the stakeholders have come together, despite all the opposition to that, to make it happen. So we just need to keep going. We need to keep plugging away at this.
Thank you very much. And James?
Celebrating totemic examples of success. We need to get the message out there that it can be done. The document is great in that regard. It gives people real demonstrable examples. Go and see them. Go and, you know, let's actually get people out there believing that it can be done, rather than it's a cost, it's a burden, it's a problem. It actually makes better places.
Thank you very much. And Dinah?
I think we've not talked about very much, which is stewardship and management. Quite often when we come somewhere, it's because somewhere has been sort of left behind, run down. So how are we going to look after it in the long term, and how are we going to make sure that everybody benefits from it, not just, you know, the fit and able-bodied and whatever. So it's so much got to be a part of the design process and taking people on that journey, so that at the end they're part of the stewardship, which I think is co-production, if I'm right, which goes one step further than co-design, which is what we would like to be doing.
Thank you very much, Dinah. And last but by no means least, Chris.
Thank you. I was just thinking about that really hard. What is an answer that is both works on a macro and micro scale? And listening to what James has just said and Dinah, I think I would pose three questions that I think work. Work on any level. And the first one might sound a bit negative, but I think it's really important to make people stop and park their own thought process. What happens if we don't? And I think that's it's a question that's never asked, really, about the status quo. What happens if we don't? Describe to me the place that you want to live, and then does what you're proposing or doing get you closer or further away? And I think we can ask that on pretty much any level, of be it a local councillor or at planning or at any level, and they've got a good chance of keeping us honest, I think, and on the right path. And I've got faith in this product. I've got faith in this. And I think if we ask people the right questions, a very large proportion of us will end up in the same place.
Thank you very much, Chris. And apologies to those of the audience whose questions we haven't been able to get to. We've had quite a lot this afternoon because, as we all know, this is a fantastic topic and we know there's lots of interest in it. But as, again, Nick mentioned right at the beginning, this is the start of a rollout. So hopefully there will be more opportunities to put those questions to the Sport England and others. And it's certainly an ongoing, important conversation. So I must thank our speakers, Chris, Jeanelle, Dinah, Julia, James and Nick. You've all been fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you to the audience for joining us and for asking us lots of questions. And please do go and have a look at the guidance, have a look at the animation, and please do contact Sport England. Yes, they provided contact information. Sorry, the slide's tiny on my screen, but do contact them directly if you've got any questions, and go and champion the guidance and embed it, please. Thank you very much.